If you're a football manager, sackings are part of the job because even the best managers sometimes get the chop, but not every sacking is deserved. From managers losing their jobs after historic titles to mega meltdowns in press conferences, these are some of the craziest sackings of big-name managers in football history. Starting with Chelsea, who are responsible for more than one harsh sacking on this list, but their recent sacking of Enzo Maresca came just 3 weeks after he was named Premier League Manager of the Month. And while he had a run of bad form, he should have had credit in the bank after securing Champions League football last year and winning 2 trophies, including the first ever expanded Club World Cup. In October and November, Maresca won 5 out of 6 Premier League games, including a win over Liverpool that saw Maresca knee slide down the touchline and a 3-0 battering of Barcelona in the Champions League. But almost as soon as he was given that Manager of the Month award, he started feeling the pressure from above as he was pushed to give young players more opportunities to play and develop. Chelsea didn't sign a backup defender for that reason, but when that led to bad results, Maresca got the blame, and as he felt he was being told who he must pick, Maresca went to the press, saying after a win against Everton that many people had made the last 48 hours his worst at the club. So, with the rift between Maresca and those above him growing, all it took were a few more bad results for his detractors to stick the knife in and sack him to get Liam Rosenior into the job. But whilst this sacking was unjust, the next might have been quite literally insane, because the next manager broke his team's decade-long trophy drought and still couldn't keep his job. Anybody tuning into one of Ange Postecoglou's press conferences during his short and unsuccessful spell at Nottingham Forest would be wondering why he kept talking about Tottenham Hotspur. And it was clear to everyone that the Australian still had a chip on his shoulder the size of the Great Barrier Reef over his sacking from Spurs, and that's no surprise, as his sacking from Spurs was painfully harsh. After all, this is Spurs, a club so allergic to winning trophies that their trophy cabinet is still in its IKEA flat pack packaging. So when Ange Postecoglou did the impossible and actually won a major trophy with Tottenham Hotspur, you'd expect him to get the keys to White Hart Lane as he took the Lily Whites to European glory, beating Manchester United 1-0 in Bilbao to win the Europa League. And Postecoglou did all that with an injury-hit side where, in some games, he could barely play a single first-choice player. And although the critics will argue that Big Ang injured all those players through his Angball tactics and that finishing 17th in the Premier League is not very good, even for Spurs. But the reality is that the club was in no danger of relegation and that winning the Europa League means qualification for the Champions League the next season, whereas finishing a few places higher in the Premier League does not. But Tottenham didn't see it that way, so they binned off Postecoglou, and his replacement has taken Spurs to the dizzying heights of lower mid-table. It's who they are, mate. But the next manager on the list had the opposite problem for Postecoglou because he did rather well in the league, but got the sack for failing to win a European trophy, even though it was the referee's fault. Carlo Ancelotti has won the Champions League 5 times, so was the perfect choice for Bayern Munich, who craved Europe's top trophy, and by any other measure, Ancelotti's time in Bavaria was a raging success, as he won the Bundesliga by 15 points, making him the first manager to win the league in 4 of Europe's top 5 leagues. But in Europe, it was a different story, as Bayern lost to Real Madrid in the Champions League quarterfinal in a match where the referee was so bad, even Madrid fans felt he favored the Spanish side. Then, in the summer, Ancelotti didn't get the backing he needed to replace key players who retired or got injured, and there was a split in the locker room with big names complaining about not getting enough game time. But that didn't stop Bayern Munich from pulling the trigger and sacking Ancelotti after a Champions League group stage loss to Paris Saint-Germain in what he called the most ruthless dismissal of his career. And Ancelotti knows a thing or two about ruthless dismissals, as his sacking from Bayern Munich isn't his only entry on this list. But I'm sure he was compensated properly at those clubs, unlike this next legendary manager who won the UEFA Cup, the European Cup Winners' Cup with Barcelona, and took England to the World Cup semi-finals. But when he took a job at his hometown club, Bobby Robson said Newcastle United offered him a salary miles below the going rate. Still, that didn't stop him from massively overachieving, as he took Newcastle from bottom of the Premier League to achieve 3rd and 4th place finishes and even reached the semi-finals of the UEFA Cup. I would have given him a lifetime contract at this point, but Newcastle thought differently, and Robson had a fallout with chairman Freddie Shepherd, who Robson said was keeping information about transfer negotiations from him and letting the training ground rot, causing players to get injured, and, as well as that, players started causing trouble, with midfielder Kieran Dyer refusing to play out of position and Craig Bellamy threatening to leave Newcastle if they signed prime Wayne Rooney, which, to me, sounds like a good swap. And with all this squad discontent, just 4 games into the new season, yes, just 4 games into the season after previously finishing 5th in the Premier League, Newcastle sacked Robson and spent the next 20 years in the doldrums. And Bobby Robson is such a legendary manager that even his translators win European trophies, including his former translator and then assistant manager at Porto. You might have heard of him. Manchester United haven't had much success recently, but their most successful manager since Ferguson retired has been Jose Mourinho, who has the 2nd highest win percentage of any United manager ever and won the Europa League and finished 2nd in the Premier League, and has won more trophies at Manchester United than all of the other managers since. But unfortunately for Mourinho, some of his players lack the same winning mentality, including record-signing Paul Pogba, whose agent had been pushing for a move to crosstown rivals Manchester City, but whose atrocious performances saw him dropped from the team and stripped of the vice-captaincy. And Mourinho could see that despite his early success, the problems at United ran deep, so when United lost to Sevilla, he ranted about football heritage, saying that United had been rubbish in Europe for years and that before him, United hadn't been close to challenging for the Premier League title for years. And while his speech was full of facts, it perhaps touched a nerve, and after a poor start to the 17-18 season, marred by training ground fights with Pogba, touchline bust-ups and rants in interviews, Mourinho was sacked, with the club 6th in the Premier League, and the owner saying the sacking was in the long-term interest of the club, which, in hindsight, looks like a bit of a joke. But after Mourinho's sacking, Pogba posted an Instagram post saying, "Caption this," hinting that he was glad Mourinho had been sacked. He later deleted the tweet and said it was part of a pre-planned marketing campaign for Adidas, but perhaps if he'd been more focused on football than fashion, his performances wouldn't have been so underwhelming. Since then, Manchester United have lived up to that football heritage, as they haven't looked close to being a top side for years. But the same could be said for Chelsea in 15-16, when they finished in embarrassing 10th place in the Premier League. But their next manager, Antonio Conte, would change all that, and the next season he would do far better than 10th. But nobody predicted how effective his 3-4-3 formation, strict rules, and vomit-inducing tough training sessions would be, as Chelsea stormed the league and finished with almost twice as many points as the previous season to win the Premier League title easily. And the next season, they finished 5th but won the FA Cup, which is a lot better than Chelsea had been doing before Conte. But then Chelsea decided that a league title and FA Cup wasn't good enough, and Conte had been angry with the Chelsea board over transfers and his lack of control over how things were done, saying the club decides every player. But the board were not happy with Conte's power play, so they sacked him. But that wasn't the end of this story, as Conte was entitled to a massive compensation payout, so the club tried to sue him and used text messages to striker Diego Costa to try and build a case against the Italian. But in the end, they had to pay Conte and his staff more than £26 million in compensation, and they haven't won the Premier League since then either, and Chelsea's habit of sacking successful managers had cost them more than £90 million for the period between Roman Abramovich buying the club and Chelsea sacking Conte. So it's no surprise that a few more managers on this list have also been given their P45 from Stamford Bridge, including this next manager. Carlo Ancelotti attracts trophies like he swallowed an electromagnet, and Chelsea was no exception, as he won the Community Shield in his first game in charge, and then just kept winning until Chelsea clinched a dramatic league title on the final day of the season, beating Wigan 8-0 to become the first side in Premier League history to score more than 100 goals in a season. And then he added to that by winning the FA Cup, giving Ancelotti the domestic double in his first season at Stamford Bridge. And the next season was tougher, but Chelsea were top of the league midway through the season when Chelsea suddenly decided to sack his assistant manager Ray Wilkins, which led to a drop-off in form. But Chelsea still took the title race to the penultimate game of the season before eventually finishing in second place, 9 points behind Manchester United. But at the time, Ancelotti still had the third highest win rate in Premier League history. But according to Chelsea, that record fell short of expectations, and Ancelotti was sacked just 2 hours after the final game of the season and was replaced by Andre Villas-Boas, who didn't come close to Ancelotti's level at Chelsea. But if Ancelotti was sacked for coming second, what happened to this next manager is even worse, as Vicente Del Bosque was one of the most successful Real Madrid managers of recent years, winning the Champions League twice and La Liga twice in 4 years. Not to mention a bunch of other trophies, as well as creating the Galacticos squad that boosted Real Madrid's marketability into the stratosphere. And those superstars loved Del Bosque and his ice-cool demeanor, which helped him balance all those egos. But despite his mega success, Del Bosque's traditional profile didn't impress Real Madrid president Florentino Perez, who wanted a Galactico coach to go with his Galactico players. And so even though the players loved Del Bosque and he kept winning trophies, Perez decided it was best to make a change during times of success. So, just 1 day after winning the La Liga title, Del Bosque was sacked in what the BBC dubbed the unluckiest manager ever. Because sacking someone the day after winning the league is an insane thing to do, and unsurprisingly, fans were not happy with Perez's decision, and they were even more unhappy when Real Madrid shuffled through 7 coaches in the next 4 years, before eventually winning another La Liga title under Fabio Capello, who was sacked in the summer after his league win, as Real Madrid proved they couldn't learn from their mistakes. And there's another Real Madrid manager later on this list who wasn't given a fair chance, but Del Bosque would get the last laugh as he won the World Cup with Spain in 2010, a full 4 years before Real Madrid would win their next Champions League title. And the Champions League can drive owners mad, as it is so difficult to win. But so many managers, like Ancelotti at Bayern Munich, are unfairly sacked for failing to win it. But the next manager actually won the Champions League for his club under tough circumstances, but that wasn't enough to save him from new owners. Thomas Tuchel joined Chelsea after they had been under a transfer embargo and couldn't sign any quality players, and they were very much a 4th-place Premier League team, and not the title winners they had been in the past. And they were as low as 9th when Tuchel took over, but a strong run meant they finished the season in 4th, which is respectable enough. But his real achievement was in the Champions League, where Chelsea beat Real Madrid in the semi-finals and Manchester City in the final to win Europe's top trophy for only the 2nd time in their history. And the next season, he won the Super Cup and Club World Cup, as well as reaching the finals of the League Cup and the FA Cup and coming in 3rd in the Premier League. And he did all this with political turmoil in the background, as the club assets were frozen due to sanctions on its Russian owner Roman Abramovich, who was forced to sell the club. But the new American owners didn't seem to understand how football worked, so they spent a record £250 million on new players and expected the club to immediately win every game. And clearly that pressure was getting to Tuchel, who got sent off against Spurs and made things worse by claiming the referee was biased. And there were rumors that Tuchel didn't agree at all with Chelsea's new transfer strategy and had fallen out with some of the players. But the club's new owners only gave Tuchel until September to try and sculpt a team out of all the new players and keep everyone happy, which is an absolutely impossible job, as the squad was so big that there weren't enough seats in the dressing room for all of them. So Tuchel was sacked with the club at 6th place in the league, and his replacements also couldn't deal with the insane player turnover, as Chelsea finished the season in 12th place, winning as many games in the whole of the second half of the season as Tuchel had won in the 6 games before his sacking. Some of these sackings have been harsh, but this next one was both harsh and plain right dumb, especially when you're a team that is famous for not winning trophies, and then you hire a manager who is an expert at winning trophies, and then you fire him just before a cup final where you have a great chance to win a trophy. But that's exactly what Tottenham Hotspur did in 2021, as the year earlier they'd hired Jose Mourinho, who, at that point in time, had won a trophy at every single club he had managed since joining Porto almost 2 decades earlier. And while Mourinho can rub some people up the wrong way, that's the price you pay for success and trophies. And in his first season at Spurs, he took over a team that was struggling at 14th in the league and guided them to 6th. And the following season, Spurs were 7th in February, but also Mourinho had guided them to the League Cup final where they would play Manchester City. But just days before that chance to actually win some silverware, Spurs sacked Mourinho in a move that absolutely nobody saw coming, even if recent results hadn't been great and he had fallen out with some players like Dele Alli, who spent most of his time under Mourinho on the substitutes bench, although Ali didn't do anything impressive at all after Jose left. But there was also speculation that Mourinho's sacking was because he opposed Spurs' unpopular attempt to join a breakaway European Super League. And later Mourinho said the decision to sack him just before a cup final was Chairman Daniel Levy's most ridiculous decision, and, unsurprisingly, caretaker manager Ryan Mason lost the final and Spurs' culture of never winning trophies continued. And when a so-called big club has a long period without success, patience can wear thin, especially when the club has become a bit of a meme. And Manchester United are at that meme stage now, thanks to ridiculous fans who refuse to cut their hair until the club wins 5 games in a row. But rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater, sometimes a bit of patience is needed. So when Ruben Amorim took over from Erik ten Hag and took over what he described as probably the worst Manchester United team in history, it was clear to most sane people that it would take him quite a bit of time to turn around the team's fortunes. So even though United had an abysmal season and finished 15th in the league, judging Amorim solely on his first season wouldn't be entirely fair. And in his second season, there were signs that he was slowly turning things around, as apart from games against the top 3, he only lost 2 matches and he won the Manager of the Month award in October, and he was on a run of 1 loss in 8 games by the start of January. But the pressure of all the memes over his magnetic tactics board and United's leaky roof and barber-avoiding supporters became too much. And after a draw away at informed Leeds United, Amorim exploded, saying he was the manager of the team and not the coach, and that promises had been broken after the club missed out on signing anybody who was actually good at football. And he even name-dropped Gary Neville, who had been commenting on what was going on at United. But this explosive rant only had one conclusion, and that was that Amorim was going to get sacked. And 2026 seems to be the era of mad sackings midway through the season, with coaches lasting less than a year in the era of instant results. Xabi Alonso won an improbable and, to some, impossible title at Bayer Leverkusen in one of the most impressive managerial performances in recent years, winning a league where Bayern Munich are so dominant that the title is usually wrapped up by February. And not only that, but it was a first-ever title for Leverkusen, and they did it by going unbeaten all season, matching Arsenal's invincibles. But after this incredible feat, one of the top young coaches in the world was only given 233 days at Real Madrid before getting the chop. The club called it by mutual agreement, but most fans see it as a sacking. And the crazy thing is, Alonso's results were generally quite good, losing just 2 league games as Real Madrid were top of the league toward the end of November and playing in a manner where Real Madrid may well have won La Liga this season, as well as being in a strong position to reach the next stage of the Champions League. But almost as soon as he walked through the door at the Bernabeu, Alonso ran into problems with players refusing to buy into his ideas and star striker Vinicius Jr. saying he wouldn't sign a new contract. And to succeed at Madrid, you need to have the backing of President Florentino Perez. But he never fully trusted Alonso, and things took a turn for the worse when Alonso subbed off Vinicius during Madrid's win in the El Clasico in October, and Vinicius reacted angrily in public to this substitution. So the warning signs were there. But nobody would have guessed what would happen at the Supercopa de España, as this match is the least important game of the season and is so unimportant that it's played in Saudi Arabia instead of Spain. But when Real Madrid lost the Supercopa to Barcelona, everything kicked off, as after the match, Alonso called for the players to make a guard of honor for Barcelona's players, but striker Kylian Mbappe instead told the players to leave the pitch. And rather than following their manager, the players followed Mbappe instead. And from that moment, there was no way back for Alonso, and he left the club, ironically, with the 6th highest win percentage of any Real Madrid manager ever. But what this next manager did was somehow even more impressive than winning the Bundesliga with Bayer Leverkusen, but yet he still got sacked for it. Leicester City had just pulled off one of the greatest relegation great escapes, becoming only the 3rd Premier League side to avoid relegation after being bottom of the league at Christmas. But turmoil over the summer meant they sacked their manager and were again favorites for relegation the next season. And their new appointment, Claudio Ranieri, was seen by pundits as a joke and not the right kind of manager for a relegation battle. But everybody was ripping up their prediction sheets in 2015 as Leicester City just kept winning. And rather than being in a relegation fight, the club went on to win the Premier League in what has been described as a football miracle. And they did this not with expensive signings, but with players that had been signed for cheap or who had been at Leicester since their time in the 2nd tier, such as legendary striker Jamie Vardy, who only a few years earlier had been playing in non-league. So, after the greatest title shock ever, did anyone really expect Leicester to succeed again the following season? Probably not. And to make things more difficult for Ranieri, the club signed him several dud players and sold their star midfielder N'Golo Kante to Chelsea. And Ranieri's squad also had to compete in the Champions League, so had even more games than they were used to. But Leicester somehow came top of their Champions League group and reached the knockout stage. But in the Premier League, it was not going quite as well, as Leicester were stuck in the bottom half of the table. But if they'd been in that position a year earlier, people would have said Ranieri was doing a good job. Somehow, the owners expected once-in-a-century miracles like winning the league to happen every year. So, even though Leicester were 15th in the table, which would have been considered good when Ranieri was appointed, Leicester's board summoned the senior players and, after a meeting, they decided to sack their greatest manager ever just months after winning the league in what has been described as an inexplicable panic. And there were rumors that players had forced Ranieri out, and while Ranieri was named the world's best manager of the year, Leicester City struggled for the rest of the season and eventually finished 12th, showing that no matter what you achieve as a manager, you're only a few bad results away from being sacked. But if you want to relive that epic story of Leicester's miracle title, then watch the video on screen now. It is a really good one.